This is Dance Studio 411, where we answer your real-life questions about your toughest studio life predicaments. Parent problems, teacher turnover, student challenges, policy dilemmas, and so much more. Let's talk about what's keeping you awake at night and what you can do about it. Here are your hosts, Suzanne Blake Garrity and Jill Tyrone.
Welcome to this episode of the Dance Studio 411 podcast. I'm Jill Tyrone, and today's episode is Grace Under Pressure, leading your studio with humor, heart, and flexibility. This is a great conversation I'm having with Samantha Bower, and we're talking all today about staying grounded and really being creative in times of change. So we know running a dance studio takes vision, it takes resilience, and the ability to laugh, especially when things don't go as planned. I love to laugh at myself, so hopefully we're going to be able to inject a little humor today. But in this podcast episode, we're sitting down with Samantha Bower, and she's a veteran studio owner and mentor, and we're exploring what it means to lead through change without losing your joy or even losing your mind. So from staffing challenges and shifting student expectations to creative problem solving, and really looking at your studio culture as well. Samantha shares real life insights and actionable strategies today. And we're also going to just talk about a nice refreshing dose of humor in your life and in your studio. So if you've ever felt overwhelmed, so yes, I'm talking right to you, studio owners, we know you're overwhelmed, but you're unsure of really how to lead and get to the path when it feels uncertain, this episode will remind you that you're not alone, and you're more capable than you think. So, hi, Samantha, welcome.
Hi, Jill. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. So today we're talking all about really looking at studio ownership and how we can take some of the challenges, but look at them a little bit differently. So inject a little bit of humor, lead with confidence, and really go from the heart and being flexible in your approach as well. So we all have those moments where things don't quite go as planned. And I know we're going to get to that in just a minute. So first and foremost, I want to hear all about your journey. I love to have you introduce yourself because I can read your bio, but we really want to hear from you, Sam. So tell us a little bit about your background, your journey through studio ownership, and then where you are today.
Awesome. Yeah. So I am the youngest of 5 kids. I was born and raised in Massachusetts. My dad is a tennis and health club professional. He owns health clubs in Massachusetts and New England and is a tennis player. And my mother was a minister, or she's a retired minister. And when I was about 5 years old, I saw the movie Annie, the 1982 movie, and I fell in love with the movie and just the idea that a child could be in a movie and be a movie star. So I wanted to be a movie star. And like I said, I was the youngest of 5. So I feel like by the time I rolled around, my parents, I was very independent. My parents were like, figure it out, do it yourself, make your lunch, that kind of life, which was really good and wonderful for me ultimately. But, they weren't going to be stage parents. And so if I was going to kind of forge this path, I would have to kind of do it on my own. So my mother did sign me up for dance classes and acting classes and singing lessons, which was great, but I was having trouble finding places to perform. So, and this was like pre-internet, so it wasn't that easy. You'd have to look in the newspaper to figure out if there was an audition coming up. And so I did find a local community theater through a newspaper article, and I auditioned and got in, and I was in a production of Carousel. And I loved the whole experience. I loved this idea that, performing on stage, I was always, I think as a child, I was an extrovert. I wouldn't call myself that anymore, but I just loved being the center of attention and performing for people. So that was great. But after that experience, it was really tough to find future things. Like there wasn't much out there other than taking classes, which I love taking classes, but I wanted to be on stage. So when I was 14, I decided to start my own company so that I could perform in it. So it was called the Friends of Broadway, and it was a group of kids, and actually it was all girls. It's still all girls. I was in 9th grade, and I held an audition, and I bought an ad in playbill.com, and maybe back then you didn't even have to pay for an ad. I don't remember, but and we had a bunch of kids come out. And I ran this audition, and I think people were surprised when they showed up and it was a 14-year-old kid running it. And yet it came together, and we had like 7 girls in it for the first year, and we would travel to pretty much wherever anyone would let us perform. So we'd go to malls, we did children's hospital, we did nursing homes, and pretty soon it started to become a bigger thing. I found someone. There was like a children's showcase in New York City that I applied for. We like sent in a cassette tape of us singing, and we got to go to an off Broadway theater in New York and perform for agents and managers. And so from there, that's where it all started. And it was through that experience that I ran that all through high school. And it was through that I sort of discovered that teaching was really more where I wanted to be. So I loved being on stage, but it was very quickly realized that it was a calling. It was just, I was much better off running shows and producing and creating and being in charge of sort of that destiny, not going out in the world and auditioning and have someone else do that for me. So I went to college for theater education, and I opened up my studio in 2007, and it's called the Performing Arts Connection. It's out in Sudbury, Massachusetts, and it offers a little bit of everything. So it's singing, dancing, musical theater, voice lessons. So really kind of speaks to the heart of that 5-year-old who saw Annie, who wanted to be a star. So all the things. And yeah, so that's how it kind of all started. It was through sort of my own passion for wanting to be on stage. And then I've always loved kids. I think because I'm the youngest, I always wanted a younger sister or brother. I never got that. So I was always babysitting, and it just really just sort of married my love of children and my love of the arts. So that's where we are today. We're entering our 19th season this fall. And yeah, it's been an amazing journey, and I'm glad to be here doing it. It's doing what I love to this day.
That's great. I really didn't realize that your journey started all the way back, really, when your entrepreneurial spirit started back when you were 14. That's amazing. So,
Thank you.
that's a perfect example of, my daughter's 14 right now. It's a perfect example of being industrious and, going after what you want. So in those times you had to, like you mentioned, it wasn't as easy. The internet wasn't there.
No, I like to think that I'm like, with all the cassette, like all the videotaping we did, like as kids, I'm like, we totally would have been TikTok stars, like all the karaoke parties we had. Like we didn't have any of the things now, but thinking back, I was like, I would have been all over that. I'm glad we didn't have any of that, to be honest. But
Yeah, I know what you mean. And you were the early pioneer of what would have been TikTok and
yes.
TikTok famous at the time. That's great. So in all of the years that you've owned your studio, I can guarantee that things did not always go as planned. I'm sure there are times where things were wonderful and things were really smooth, and but boy, you can get some bumps in the road along the way. So why don't you share with us about one of those moments that didn't quite go as planned at your studio? How did you learn to adapt, and what did that teach you about leadership? Because that's really what we want to share today, is nice tidbits and some things that our listeners can take away today and think, oh, you know what? That would be a great way to approach this issue or this problem that I'm having.
Yeah, definitely. Well, early on in my career, it was a lot of parent management. I think partially because I was so young, and I think there's a lot of studio owners out there that are in, I mean, I was a teenager, but even when I opened my studio, I was barely out of college, super young, and it felt like for a long time the parents were kind of running the show, and I had to sort of adapt to the parents. As time went on, and I figured out like, okay, well, this policy needs to be in place, or I need to kind of, this is where I put my foot down. This is where my boundary is. Slowly over time, the parent management it's just not as high key as it was back when I was first starting out. And now it's a lot of staff management and realizing, how do I support this team to really flourish and thrive? And it wasn't until the pandemic that really opened my eyes to sort of the possibility and necessity of full-time employment. So I was sort of in this place of, the business is growing. I have a lot of part-time people, but I feel like there's an opportunity here to bring in, we have enough work for a full-time person. I didn't have a lot at that time. I wasn't part of any coaching groups or I didn't even know that there were places, out there like, Revolution and all these things. Like I didn't know about that. So I was really on the island, as they say. But I really felt like I need to do something because I just feel like there's so much work to be done. And every year it feels like we're having some turnover with staff or not, everybody's sort of dabbling in these little things here and there. And it seems like this is an opportunity to have someone more full time. And so that was when I first started that didn't go as planned. Like I didn't really have the information I needed or the resources I needed to make it work as well as it is now, because I was just sort of throwing spaghetti at the wall and like, let's try this. And then realizing, well, I offered you this salaried position, but actually you need health insurance, or, you're doing 1,000 hours a week of teaching, but I didn't really equate for the fact that you have to plan for those classes, and that takes hours and hours. So what I'm looking at, it's 40 hours a week. It's probably more like 55 hours a week, because there's planning that you have to do, on the other side. So through that, I think that that was a big learning curve for me as I was really trying to explore. And then not just for full-time, because I know a lot of studios, for us, it was a necessity because we have the performing arts side too. It's just sort of there's all these little micro businesses within our studio. But just sort of understanding the employee experience was over the years, it's just been a very organic growth learning curve for me, because I started so young and was never really anyone else's employee. So I really had to like listen to my team and pay attention to what they needed and wanted. And I think the pandemic had a lot of moments of like, wow, that didn't go as planned. But that to me was sort of the main thing that sort of rose to the top, was how to really make sure that we're taking care of employees in the way that they want to be taken care of. So yeah, that one really kind of stood out to me.
Yeah, and you mentioned about community and feeling like you were on an island, and that's probably one of the biggest things over the years that I've heard from studio owners. Is like, how do I do this? I feel really alone. Like, again, like you said, your business grew and it grew pretty quickly and it was evolving, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, how are we going to make this work and be even better? And I love the fact that you were talking about supporting the team and making sure that you transition them into, if the job was available, full-time employees with benefits, because that's really important, because that shows that you really care. And it makes a big difference when people, whether they're contractors and they're 1099s or they're full-time employees, or even, not a 1099 contractor, you can tell that you've learned. You don't want to throw spaghetti at the wall. You want to actually have some policies in place. You want to have your systems in place. You want to take care of them because you want them to stick around. So that's one thing that we love about the studio owner, is that there is a community, and you're definitely able to get the support. And Samantha, you've been in our group for a while now, and that's what we love to do. We love to support the studio owners. So thanks for sharing your journey on that. I know you mentioned too about the pandemic, and thank goodness we're really on the other side of that. But right now we're in another situation where things feel a little uncertain. The world feels a little heavy. There's a lot happening, in our country, in the world. What do you think that we could talk about to studio owners who are listening to this when they're thinking about, staff shortages or burnout specifically? How can you keep your morale up with your team? Because you've been doing this for a while, and you've really grown and learned through the years. What do you do when things get tough?
Yeah, that's a great question, and so important to ask. So, because things get tough a lot, even if, you can be as prepared as possible, you can have all your ducks in a row, and suddenly the venue for your recital calls and says, actually, we've got the PTO meeting that we can't move, So it's there's always going to be something around the corner. Honestly, like nothing surprises me anymore. However, it doesn't mean that I can't, try to prepare for those things, and also, not take it too seriously, because at the end of the day, like, we don't have to take ourselves so seriously. We take the work seriously, but not ourselves. So I'm a workhorse, and it honestly took the pandemic and my third child, which all happened at the same time, to sort of realize that not everyone operates that way. And honestly, I couldn't operate that way anymore. So my motto over the past few years has become work hard, play hard, rest hard. And that is really important to me. And I think for a long time it was work hard, play hard. And I just recently added the rest hard. And I mean it very sincerely. It's so important to take time away from the studio and away from the the daily grind. So one thing that we do at our studio is I very intentionally structure our breaks. Honestly, probably a little bit longer than what a typical studio might do, or typical in the arts might be doing. And they're just in our calendar. So during those times, and I found too for myself that I rest better when the studio is closed. So I can, I'm at a point in my career where I can leave the studio while it's open, and I could take a trip. I went to Greece last summer. It was a beautiful time with my husband and my college friends, and the studio was running and it was fine. But it doesn't mean, and I always tell this to, I tell this to people who ask, if the studio is open, my brain is still there, because there are children in my building that at the end of the day, it's my responsibility to make sure that they are safe and secure and happy and things are going smoothly. So even if I just leave it and trust it entirely to my team, which I can do, my heart is still pulled in that direction. So there are many moments in our calendar where we close and we are closed, and I want everyone off. So for me, that's been very, very helpful, because I can shut down when I know the studio is fully shut down. And some people might be able to do the opposite, but for me, that's what really works. So I just find that it works really well for us, and I can recharge better. So that's one thing that I think people should really consider is, when you're closed, be closed. And, people will come back after. Like, they'll still be there when you're ready to come back.
And it's interesting you say that. I love this approach, because I would bet there are a lot of studio owners listening today who, when you're closed for break and there are no students in the studio, you're still working.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important. I want everybody to hear what Sam just talked about and what she just said. When you're on break, be on break. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good thing. Let your body rest, let your mind rest. I'll put you on the spot. What's your favorite thing for self-care? Is it travel, like you mentioned, or what do you like to do when you are on break?
So I find that my favorite break is the 2 weeks at the Christmas winter holidays, because I find that the whole world is on a break, not just our studio. So I tend to, if I'm really resting, I'll read. I'll go on like a reading spree. So I feel like a couple years ago, I think I read like 10 books over the course of 2 weeks. So that's if I'm just really in my rest mode. I do love to travel. I love sunshine, so I'll go anywhere with a beach. And then sometimes it's just like being home with my kids and just hanging out and playing soccer in the yard, and just kind of like just shutting it all down and being present with my kids. Because I think too, I still have this, and it's something I still work on, is that the studio is always on my mind. So even if we're closed, it takes a couple days, honestly, for me to like to completely be like, to get it to compartmentalize and push it to the side. And then I really let it go. I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. I couldn't tell you. And I'll also add like if you have Gmail, I don't know if other email people can do this, but schedule send your emails. Like if you absolutely have to reply to somebody, like just have it scheduled, sent for the day you're back. And I encourage my staff to do this too. Like none of us want to get emails from each other when we're closed, unless it's like an app, even if you're not checking it. Like everyone has it on their phone. You might get that little ding. So my team is really on board with it as well. I mean, naturally, I think they're like excited to just kind of shut it down. But that's another little easy tip, I think, the schedule send. But yeah.
That's a great tip. I'm a big fan of productivity and little things, little hacks to do. So schedule, send those emails. And that really sends a great message. You mentioned to your team, which I think is super important. You're setting the tone for the team and building that morale where they know if you're on break and you're on vacation, they don't need to work. They don't need to be checking their messages. They don't need to be doing email. That can wait till they come back. And then two, it sets the tone obviously for your families. So I think that's really important. They know that, unless there's a huge emergency with your building or something that's going on, and maybe the pipes freeze and there's a huge flood, which we would hope wouldn't happen. But, honestly, there's nothing mission critical that will happen in those like 7 days where you can't just literally shut it down.
So true. Yep. And I think too, if you're thinking about this and how could I do this, or how can I can't take 2 weeks off, or, you might have a different situation. But it also doesn't have to be that long. Like even a day off, one thing that I learned too over the years is I started to make sure, that that people had days off. That was something I hadn't even really thought about. Like it wasn't, and one of my employees a couple years ago was like, we really next year need to take the Monday off after recital. I'm like, what? What do you mean? She's like, well, I'm like, because I know I couldn't imagine it. But then, you just worked 7 days in a row. Like you should have a day or two off, in between. And now we end up taking the whole week off after recital. But it made sense to me. And I think the burnout comes from if we're not paying attention to that. Like once I sort of sat down and realized it was sort of the lesson planning thing. Like I give you, 20 hours of teaching and 20 hours of admin, but then I forgot that, those 20 hours of teaching require you to lesson plan, but I didn't account for any of that. It's like once you realize sort of the amount of time and energy that you're asking of your team, where for you as an entrepreneur, as a studio owner, it's just like, this is what we do. Like we work a lot. We're not even counting the hours. We have no idea how many hours we're working half the time. I mean, I don't even want to track sometimes some of the weeks that I'm working, partially because I love it. And I don't even, sometimes I don't notice it, but for our team, they do. And so I think paying attention to like, when was the, if I have an employee of a dance team manager, and, I'm paying attention. If she's got a competition that weekend, she gets Monday off, because otherwise she's going 14 days without a day off. That's how you're going to burn your team out. And I don't want to burn my team out. And sometimes I say, and sometimes we work more hours than 40. It's not always going to be a perfect, 30 to 40 hour week. And sometimes we have to do more, but we as the owners have to we have a responsibility to them to make sure that we're not overdoing it, just because we can.
I like what you just said. You have a responsibility to them, and that's really shows your growth as a leader and taking a look and making sure that everybody stays happy and healthy. Let's talk now more about really leading with humor and creativity. So what does that look like in your everyday decisions, or even some of the big decisions you make? But what can we do for really just try to use humor almost as a coping mechanism? Because I know we mentioned this before I hit the record button. I work remotely. I'm here by myself. I talk to myself a lot, and I find myself cracking jokes and literally laughing at myself because of some silly thing that I did or a response. And we were in a meeting yesterday that was, pretty heavy, and we're talking a lot about what's happening in the state of the world, so to speak. And, somebody cracked a joke, and it took us a beat, but then the humor was contagious, and we all started laughing, and boy, it lightened the mood tremendously. And we had a great meeting, not because of the humor, but it helped definitely alleviate the tension a little bit. So when we talked before we hit the record button, we really want to hone in and making sure that creativity is forefront. We're not burning out, but I think humor can lend a hand in making sure that happens.
Yeah. Yes, I kind of felt like I was the class clown growing up. And I just was sort of, if you understood my humor, you thought I was funny. Otherwise, you thought I was just kind of weird, but like it was a good weird, just kind of always saying something random, or like, what are you, just always sort of dropping just like random things. Like if you know me long enough, like you'll end up with a nickname, like, and I'll make sure you're okay with the nickname, but like most people have a nickname. Little things like if I'm talking to a team about, different scenarios that could happen in the classroom, like, I'm going to make up random names. Like if you know me, Sally Ann Kavanaugh, she comes up a lot, Tilly Bowles, like you just never know what names are going to come out. And they're just little things that sort of just give the room a little bit more of just a lighter mood, a lighter tone. It doesn't have to be necessarily like, oh, you're a comedian, but just like not taking it so seriously. So like certain things, when we have a staff meeting, I always try to make them really fun. There's always food, but there's always a game at the beginning. And there's always like something to bring people together where we just, it's not, people have their feelings about like icebreakers, but it is important to come together when you're coming together with a group to give a little bit of space for people to, just ease into the activity or the meeting and take a minute to just kind of have a personal moment with everybody, whether it's through what we call fancy news or like, rosebud thorn, where each person can share something. And I just think just don't overlook that, because I think those are great ways to connect everybody before we get into the big stuff. We'll play like weird games, like, taking a spin on, what do we do for St. Patrick's Day? We have a meeting right around there for getting ready for recital. And we did like leprechaun trivia, like just random things that are, just to keep it light, keep it fun. I do a lot with classroom management. Like, I think if people were to describe, I still teach a couple days a week. That's not true. I still teach once a week, a couple classes. I think a lot of my kids would just say that I'm funny. So even when I'm leading a classroom, if I'm finding myself needing to, pull back the reins, or if they're kind of, on fire and I'm just trying to like get them back, put the water out, I use humor a lot with the kids. And you have to be really careful with humor in kids. I rarely use sarcasm. I try hard not to. Sometimes I can be sarcastic, but rarely. It doesn't work with kids. But humor in a lighthearted way, like, people, pull it together. If you can hear my voice, clap once, but it's not just clap once. If you can hear my voice, chop some broccoli. Like, if you can hear my voice, clap 2.5 times. Like, just funny little things that get people like, what is she talking about?
Yeah, how do you clap 2.5 times? I love that.
And they just do it. They figure it out. Yeah, it's just silly. It's like a silly, and I think my team appreciates it too. It's just, it doesn't have to be so serious.
Yes.
And the outside world there's a lot going on. So let's create spaces where people can come and take a load off.
I agree. And I love the fact that you mentioned about not using sarcasm with your students. I have found that, I said something one time and I was like, ooh, I wonder how that was actually perceived. So it's really important to learn the humor that you can use with adults in your team versus your students. I know one of the things that I was shocked with in one of my senior classes this year, I needed them to focus a little bit more. So I said, you know what? We were transitioning from bar to center, and I said, let's do pit and peak. And they're like, what's pit and peak? And I said, well, everybody shares a pit of the day, so something that was kind of a bummer, and then share your peak, which is something that's happy or something that was really awesome of the day. They were like, okay. So the funny part about it is they loved it, and now every time we would transition from bar to center, they would go get a drink real quick, put the bars away, and they would sit in a circle on the floor, and they would just wait to do pit and peak.
I love that.
Yeah, so it became part of our regular time in class, and it allowed me. It was the first time that I had been teaching them, so it allowed me to get to know them better as well as their teacher, and it just brought a nice little lightness to a ballet class, because ballet is a little tough, especially for those seniors that they're transitioning out, or they still have a couple more years, but they're like, okay, why do we need this today? I was like, well, here's why. And I find, especially with ballet classes, I love to inject a lot of humor. I laugh at myself a lot. And it makes them appreciate and enjoy the class just that much more. So we get a lot of stuff done, but we do it with a little bit of lightness. I also wrote down a couple notes. When you were talking about your staff meetings as well, it's tough to get everybody in a room, isn't it? At the same time?
Yes.
Do you have any tips or tricks? Because I think, it's really difficult. I was thinking, there was a question that I saw, and what do you set your staff meetings at the start of the year so that they know when they're coming up? Because that was one tip I was going to give a studio owner that had mentioned something like that. And I thought, well, you know what, if it's not sprung on them, they were trying to find a common time to meet. If it's all planned ahead of time, they have time to plan for those meetings.
Yes, definitely. And that has helped us tremendously. Typically what we'll do, you kind of have to find the sweet spot of time. Like, I know a lot of places, one thing that's been working for us is sort of alternating a morning meeting and an evening meeting, because everyone, if they're part-time, they're probably part-time at other places, and they might have kind of trickier schedules. If they're full-time, it's easier for them to come during the workday versus like a Sunday night. I do find that Sunday nights are our most successful time. Because usually, but I'm like, oh, it's such a sacred time to be like home, but these meetings are important, and they can really benefit your team. And and they should benefit your team. And it's not just about, making sure they get all the notes and info, but to make it a place where people come in similar with your pit and peak, where you can get to know your team a little bit better. That investment is worth it, for, 2 or 3 Sundays a year. So we lay out the schedule in advance. There's typically 4 staff meetings in a sort of a September to May season. And what I have them do is before they sign their contract, they do look at that whole schedule. And there are certain events that we call command events. And those are things that, they really, it's like, unless you're going to like Grandma Tilly's wedding, that would be interesting. Okay. Unless you're doing that, you really need to come to this event. We also have events that are what we call that are mandatory, but like if you needed to take time off, you would be eligible to request it. Command events have that little bit more of a, we save them for certain, like the recitals, like a big one. Anyway, so they get this schedule. We ask them to look over all the dates, and then they can request at that time if they need to, oh my gosh, I'm going to Aruba that time, or like, I've got my dance show this day, I can't come. That's when we're getting those sort of RSVPs. And it's early, like they're getting them in June or July for the following year. But that also helps. And sometimes things come up and life happens and we do it. But we found that this to be the most successful. Give them the dates in advance, ask them to review them and sign off on them. And then, if life happens, we take it from there. But that's been really helpful. And then make your staff meetings fun so people want to be there. I mean, we always feed the talent. I always say that you got to keep them fed. But funny things like last year we did there was a trend, which I'm never on the trend, but someone did it and I saw it. It was like a 90s sitcom, credits in the, when they roll the credits at the beginning and they, they have the actors there, and then they're doing something like feeding the dog, and then they look over and smile at the camera. So we did a version of that with the staff at our orientation meeting, and it was our most viral. I mean, we don't go viral, but for us, like 1,000 views is viral. So we were viral on our own Instagram with this little meet the TPAC team of season 18. So if you're not at the meeting, you don't get to be part of those fun things. So keeping it fun, keeping it silly, and giving them the dates in advance, very, very key.
So I can completely picture the 90s sitcom, funny little pause and they smile at the camera. Oh my goodness. I absolutely love that. That must have been so fun, not only to do, but then for everybody to watch and see that. I'm glad you posted that on your Insta. So
yes.
Listen, we have covered a lot of ground today, and what I really love most from hearing from you, Sam, is how much heart and soul and humor that you put into everything that you do. It's so clear and so evident how much you care about your team, about your families, about everything that goes on in your studio, and especially about taking care of yourself. So I'm glad you have gotten to a point now where you have put systems in place and you've put a great team in place so that you're able to take time for yourself. You're able to shut it down. Even if your studio is running, you're able to get away, even though it might not be 100% because you can't quite tune out 100%. But it's really good. It's really important. So thanks so much for sharing all of your time and talent. I do want to mention before we go too, you have a great program, Little Limelight. Can you share a little bit about that as we close out today? And we'll be sure to share the links to that in the show notes.
Yes, thank you so much. And those were such kind words. It's really, the journey it is truly a journey, but I love it and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Yes, so Little Limelight is a musical theater curriculum for ages 3 to 7. So one of the things from day one, theater has been my passion, and I've always loved performing, and I love children. And so when we opened up the studio in 2007, we did have not most of our classes. We did we still do have a lot of musical theater classes. So we have a 10-level curriculum for musical theater from basically second grade through high school. And then it was early on that we decided to do musical theater for 3s and 4s and 5s. And at first it was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm doing this. They can't read. How are we going to get through this? Like, what was I thinking? They're 4 years old. I don't even know how to talk to 4-year-olds. What am I doing? But over time, the class came together, the curriculum came together. I ended up having 3 kids and just started to fall in love with this preschool, early childhood age, and just, what have I been missing? This is the best. This is like the most joyful, you walk out, I come out of that class sweating more than any other class I teach, because it's just you're just on fire in a 3, 4, 5 class. So we started this curriculum, really sort of developed organically. And it was probably 4 or 5 years in that it was very clear that it was working, and it was very successful. And we started to see, it was probably around the time we graduated the first little limelight kids when they were, my gosh, they started when they were 3 or 4, and then they stayed in musical theater all the way through our whole program and dance and all the things. And they were seniors in high school. And I was just like, wow. And you could see the difference in the kids who had taken the class in early childhood to the kids who didn't and who maybe started a little bit later, just in sort of their confidence and their ease of which they were performing on stage, and the risks and choices they were taking in their work, and the way that they were performing and the way that they were speaking. And it was like, oh my gosh, I really think this has a lot to do with the program that we've developed in those early childhood years, because it's very intentionally designed to be unhurried and very much at the child's pace. And there's lots of little things within the curriculum that sort of honor the child where they are right now and really gives them the space. So for example, within the curriculum, there's a moment in class where they each get to sing a song every week. And sometimes a child won't go up or they won't raise their hand to go. And so we say, okay, great. Like we always give them 2 chances to, we'll come back around. Would you like to come up and sing? And they say no, or they might not even look at you, like they don't even want to talk. And then over time and as the year goes on, like suddenly their hand gets raised. And then maybe they don't, then you call them and they say no. And then the next time their hand gets raised and they actually get up, and then they stand there and do nothing, and then they come back down. And then over time they do it again, but then they actually open their mouths and they start singing, and they're so proud of themselves. And those are the moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is where it's at. Like if we could give this to every kid on the planet, like let them in their own way, in their own time, get up on stage and start singing in front of their peers. I mean, I talk about one of the most vulnerable things you can do. And in this curriculum that we have, which starts at 3 and goes through age 7, so it's like basically first grade, the kids who stay with it for all those years, they go into second grade and you give them a script and they're like, yeah, ready to go. Let's do this. It's just normal. Everything's normalized. And they're used to them. What we're teaching the other kids is when they're watching these children sing, how do we sit? How do we react and respond when someone is singing? What do we do when they're done? They take a curtsy, they take a bow, we clap our hands, we're facing forward. And in this day and age where children are not being asked to wait or it's just a very different world. These are these little skills, even if it's 5 minutes, 8 minutes of class, where they're learning how to wait, and similar to dance, where you're taking turns and you're learning that skill, which is so important. It's just a beautiful thing. So it is out in the world. We're about 3 years out. We have, I think, about almost 20 studios that are affiliated with the program all over the country. And it's also when I was creating it and developing it and decided, everyone's like, you should put this out there. Other people need to know about this. You should put this out in the world. And I was like, okay, fine, we'll do it. Because it was very clear to me that there wasn't really anything like it. And I have used a lot of different curriculum for other things within our dance studio. And there's some really wonderful programs out there. What I wasn't finding was like, I needed to be able to pick up a day and say, this is what I'm doing in this hour or this 45 minutes. It was more like a skills list, or it was like, here's how to do this one thing. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do when they're flailing and running around and it's the last 10 minutes of class and we've run out of, like, what am I supposed to do? So the program is very plug and play in the sense of like, you're going to get a lesson plan, and it's a 45-minute class, and exactly how long to spend on something and when and what's happening in the next thing. And then it's flexible, however you want to treat that. But that was sort of the thing I was most proud of, and I felt like was most needed too in this space.
It definitely is unique. And I think I took so many notes, and I was so intensely listening on what you were talking about, because you're speaking to my heart, especially watching the children grow and thinking about how I wrote down the word unhurried, right? You're letting them develop these amazing skills, and the skills that this program teaches them. You said they teach, you're teaching, and they're learning how to watch. They're learning how to react. They're learning cues, when to watch and be quiet, and when to then applaud and praise and be generous. And those are so many things that are really needed. So hats off to you for creating such a beautiful curriculum for that specific age group. The bigger thing that I really want to talk to the studio owners that are listening is the fact that this is an amazing program for retention.
Mm-hmm.
It gets the students into the studio, gets those families in. You're creating such a fun, structured program that they can come in and the families are enjoying what's happening, and then it feeds right into those classes after that. So, such an amazing program. We're going to put the link in the show notes. Tell them how they can find it. What's the website?
Sure. Thank you. Yes, it's littlelimelight.com.
Easy enough. Littlelimelight.com. Perfect. So go check that out. We would love for you to take a peek at the curriculum. And again, if you're looking for something that can help build your team and give you time to relax and take time off, this system and this program will give you the opportunity to be able to set your team up for success and be able to, if somebody's out, you don't have to fill those classes yourself. You might be able to then turn that curriculum right over to another teacher that you have, and they can go in. And I got to tell you, I'm not a big fan of teaching those younger kids. I think like you were initially, but I know that I would be able to take that curriculum and go in for that day and sub for a teacher, or I could probably just do it without even batting an eye because it's right there for you. And I would feel very comfortable doing that. So amazing. Sam, thank you so much today. You have been so awesome. I know that everybody's going to get so much information out of this podcast. So thanks again for your time.
My gosh, thank you. And thank you guys for all you're doing for studio owners and teachers. It's really amazing. And I wish I had found you much sooner. But what an amazing organization. So proud to be here. And thank you for your time too.
Awesome. Thanks. And we'll definitely put the links to our community in the show notes as well. So you can check us out and come join us. What a great episode with Samantha Bower. I love her energy and how relatable she is. I hope her insight and expertise gives you ideas for your own studio leadership journey and also gives you permission to add some humor into the mix. If today's episode resonates with you, we'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with another studio owner who needs to hear it. And don't forget, there's a whole group of studio leaders just like you inside our community. And if you're looking to meet up in person and learn and be inspired, we'd love for you to join us at Revolution's Energize Conference in August. Head to energizeconference.com for all the details. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Dance Studio 411. Visit us online at dancestudio411.com for more great resources and to submit a question for a future episode. Our number one goal is to help you build a successful dance studio business and keep your passion for dance alive.